No, that's not possible. My ex-husband's voice barely rose above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, everyone heard it. He had spent the last 2 days trying to convince the judge that I was an unstable, broken veteran whose combat injuries had made her unfit to raise a child. His expensive attorney stood confidently beside him. His mistress, now his wife, sat in the gallery with her arms folded, wearing the same smug expression she'd carried into court every morning. Then the judge opened my military file. He quietly adjusted his glasses. He read one sentence. That was all it took. The color drained from my ex-husband's face as though every drop of blood had abandoned him at once. No, he whispered again. That's not possible. The judge slowly looked up. It appears, he said calmly, that this court has been given an incomplete picture. At that moment, I realized something. For the first time in nearly 10 years, Daniel was afraid. Not because of me, because of the truth. And the strange thing was, I had never tried to hide it. He had simply never cared enough to ask. 9 years earlier, I didn't come home from my final deployment looking like a hero. I came home in pieces. The military flight landed at Pope Army Airfield, just outside Fayetteville, North Carolina, on a gray October afternoon. I barely remember the landing. Pain medication blurred everything. I remember the smell of antiseptic, the heavy weight of my left leg, wrapped in braces, the throbbing ache in my ribs every time I tried to breathe. I remember looking out the small window and thinking how green North Carolina looked after months overseas. Mostly, I remember thinking I was finally coming home to my husband and my baby boy. Our son Noah was only 3 months old. I had kissed his tiny forehead before leaving for what was supposed to be a short deployment. Instead, everything changed. Our convoy was caught in an attack during a humanitarian evacuation. I helped pull 2 young soldiers from a burning vehicle before another explosion threw me several feet across the road. Broken ribs, a shattered pelvis, severe damage to my left knee, months of rehabilitation ahead. The doctors told me I'd walk again, eventually, but it would take time. Time I believed my family and I would face together. I couldn't have been more wrong. Daniel met me at Walter Reed with flowers. Looking back, I think he bought them because people expected him to. He smiled for photographs, held my hand while nurses watched, even kissed my forehead. I remember thinking how lucky I was. I didn't realize he had already made up his mind. 2 days later, after I was transferred closer to home, he came into my hospital room carrying a manila envelope. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask how therapy was going. He didn't ask whether I needed anything. He simply placed the envelope on my blanket. I've already signed everything. I frowned. What is it? The divorce papers. For a moment, I honestly thought the medication was making me hallucinate. What? I can't do this anymore, Emma. I stared at him. We have a baby. I know I'm still in the hospital. I know. I can't even stand. He looked away. Then he said words I will never forget. I didn't marry someone I'd have to spend the rest of my life taking care of. The room became unbearably quiet. I searched his face for even the smallest trace of guilt. There wasn't any. What about Noah? I'll send child support. You haven't even held him this week. He'll be better off without all this. He gestured toward my wheelchair, toward my braces, toward me. For years, I wondered whether he regretted saying those words. Now I know he meant every one of them. 3 days after I was discharged, I was taken home by my older brother Michael. Daniel wasn't there. His closet was empty. Half the furniture was gone. So were the family photographs. The only thing waiting for me on the kitchen counter was a folder from his attorney. Later that afternoon, my neighbor quietly walked across the street, carrying a casserole. She hesitated before speaking. I wasn't sure if anyone had told you. Told me what? I saw Daniel yesterday. My stomach tightened. He was moving into a condo downtown. She paused. He wasn't alone. I already knew. Somehow I already knew. A week later, another military spouse sent me a picture she accidentally took at a restaurant. Daniel, laughing, holding hands with a woman from his office. The same woman he'd always insisted was just a coworker. The timestamp on the picture was from before my deployment ended. Maybe even before it began. The affair hadn't started after my injuries. It had simply become easier for him to stop pretending. Meanwhile, every morning started the same way. Pain medication, physical therapy, learning how to transfer from bed to wheelchair without dropping Noah, trying not to cry when my ribs screamed every time I picked him up. My VA therapist once asked what frightened me most. I surprised myself with the answer that my son will grow up believing his father left because of me. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that stayed with me. Children don't remember who walked away. They remember who stayed. That sentence carried me through the darkest nights. Some evenings I slept sitting upright because lying down hurt too much. Other nights, Noah cried for hours with colic while I shuffled through the hallway using a walker, praying my leg wouldn't give out before he fell asleep. There were moments I wanted to quit, moments I wondered whether Daniel had been right. Then Noah would wrap his tiny fingers around mine, and suddenly I had another reason to stand. Literally. Every painful step during rehabilitation became a promise, not to prove Daniel wrong, but to make sure my son never doubted that someone would always fight for him. I had survived a battlefield. Now I had another war to win. People love to say that time heals all wounds. It doesn't. Time simply gives you more chances to decide what you're going to do with the wounds you already have. For me, healing wasn't measured in months, it was measured in tiny victories. The first time I stood without someone catching me. The first time I walked across the living room, using only a cane. The first morning I managed to lift Noah out of his crib without crying from the pain in my ribs. Those moments mattered more than any medal I'd ever received because nobody applauded them. Nobody pinned a ribbon on my chest. But they were victories all the same. Every weekday began before sunrise. Noah usually woke around 5:30 cheerful, long before I was ready to face another day. I'd ease myself out of bed, gripping the nightstand until my left leg steady beneath me. The doctors had been right. I walked again, but I never walked the same. Cold mornings reminded me of every fracture. Rain made my knee ache like an old injury from another lifetime. Still, I walked. After feeding Noah, my brother Michael would stop by before heading to work. "You good?" He'd ask every morning. "I'm good." "You sure?" "No." That became our running joke. He'd laugh, kiss Noah on the forehead, refill anything around the house that needed fixing, and leave without making me feel like a burden. He never once treated me the way Daniel had. My parents lived in Arizona, nearly 2,000 miles away. But they called every evening. Mom sent care packages. Dad read bedtime stories over video calls until Noah was old enough to recognize his grandfather's voice. Little by little, our broken little family stopped feeling broken. After almost 18 months of rehabilitation, I was medically retired from active duty service. Handing over my military ID was harder than I'd expected. The Army had been my identity since I was 22. Now I had to figure out who Emma Carter was without a uniform. Fortunately, one of my former commanding officers refused to let me disappear. A Colonel Diane Foster called me one afternoon. "I hear you've been sitting at home too long. I have a 4-year-old. So do half the people at the Pentagon." I laughed. "I can't relocate." "I didn't ask you to." She offered me a civilian position with a Department of Defense logistics contractor in Raleigh. It wasn't glamorous. No deployments, no command, no rank. But it allowed me to use everything I'd learned over 20 years in uniform while spending every evening at home with Noah. I accepted. Money was still tight. I sold my SUV and bought a reliable used sedan. Our townhouse wasn't fancy. The carpet had seen better days. The kitchen cabinet squeaked. The backyard was barely big enough for a swing set, but it was ours. More importantly, it was peaceful. Daniel faithfully paid the child support ordered by the court. Nothing more. No birthday cards, no Christmas visits, no phone calls. Sometimes months passed without Noah even mentioning him. When he finally became old enough to ask difficult questions, I promised myself I wouldn't poison his heart. One evening after his kindergarten graduation, he climbed onto the couch beside me. "Mom?" "Yeah, buddy. Why doesn't my dad come?" Children ask impossible questions with remarkable simplicity. I turned off the television. "Your dad made different choices. Did he not love me?" The question hit harder than any explosion I'd survived overseas. I pulled him into my arms. "Listen to me." He looked up. "There is nothing wrong with you." "Then why?" "Sometimes grown-ups make selfish decisions." "Is he a bad man?" I thought carefully before answering. "No." He frowned. He made bad choices. There was a difference, one I hoped Noah would understand someday. As the years passed, I watched my son become the kind of young man every parent dreams of raising. He held doors open for strangers. He thanked waitresses. He helped elderly neighbors carry groceries without being asked. Every Veterans Day, he insisted on placing flowers beneath the local memorial, not because I told him to, because he wanted to. He became fascinated with military history. He devoured books about World War II, read biographies of Medal of Honor recipients, watched documentaries with his grandfather. One Saturday morning, he looked at me across the breakfast table. "Mom, what is it? Were you scared? Where? When you were deployed?" I smiled. Every day. His eyes widened. "Really? Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. What does it mean?" "It means doing the right thing anyway." He nodded thoughtfully. I could almost see the lesson settling into his heart. Meanwhile, life wasn't nearly as perfect for Daniel as social media suggested. Friends occasionally mentioned seeing him at expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, a beautiful house in Charlotte, photos with his wife, expensive cars. From the outside, he appeared to have everything he'd wanted. I stopped paying attention years earlier until one afternoon changed everything. It happened during Noah's 4th grade award ceremony. His teacher pulled me aside after the program. "Mrs. Carter, yes, I wanted you to know Noah has been nominated." "For what?" "The Carolina Junior Leadership Academy." I had never heard of it. She smiled. "It's an incredibly selective program." Later that night, I researched it. Leadership training, academic scholarships, community service, mentorship by retired military officers, and civic leaders. Only a handful of students were accepted each year. Noah worked tirelessly on his application. When the acceptance letter finally arrived months later, he burst through the front door waving the envelope. I got in. I hugged him so tightly, he laughed. "I knew you could." Neither of us realized someone else had been paying attention. Exactly 3 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived from a law office. I opened it, standing in my kitchen. The first line made my stomach drop. Petition for full custody. Daniel wasn't asking to visit his son. He was asking the court to take him away from me. And as I kept reading, I realized this wasn't about fatherhood. It was about winning. I must have read the first page of the custody petition 10 times before the words finally made sense. Petition for sole legal and physical custody. Not visitation, not shared parenting. Daniel wanted full custody. He wanted our son. For several minutes, I simply stood in my kitchen staring at the papers while the kettle whistled on the stove. Noah walked in carrying his backpack. "Mom." I quickly folded the documents. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just work." He nodded and disappeared upstairs. I waited until I heard his bedroom door close before allowing myself to cry. Not because I was afraid of losing, because after 9 years of silence, Daniel had suddenly decided he deserved to be called a father. The next morning, I met with an attorney recommended by another veteran. Her office overlooked downtown Raleigh. Nothing fancy, just shelves packed with legal books and framed family photographs. Her name was Linda Brooks. She had spent nearly 30 years handling family law. She read the petition without saying a word. When she finally looked up, she sighed. "This isn't really about custody," I figured. "He waited almost a decade, I know. He barely exercised the visitation rights he already had, I know." She tapped one paragraph with her pen. "Here's the real reason." The filing claimed my combat injuries had left me physically limited. It also suggested that I continued to suffer from emotional instability related to military service. Daniel's attorney argued that Noah would enjoy greater opportunities and a more stable home environment if he lived with his father. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. A stable home. Linda nodded. "We're going to need documentation. I've got medical records. We'll need more than that. I've completed every VA evaluation they've ever asked for." "Good. I've worked full-time for 7 years." "Excellent. My son's teachers know me. We'll call them." She leaned forward. "Emma." "Yes. Tell me something. What? Have you ever hidden anything from the court?" "No." "Have you ever lied about your medical condition?" "Never." She smiled. "Then don't start worrying." I wanted to believe her. But I'd spent enough time in life to know that truth didn't always win quickly. Sometimes it had to fight. Over the next several weeks, we gathered records, school attendance, medical evaluations, employment history, volunteer work, letters from neighbors, statements from Noah's teachers. Every document painted the same picture: a stable home, a healthy child, an involved mother. Meanwhile, Daniel's attorney seemed determined to turn my military service into a liability. During depositions, the questions became increasingly insulting. Mrs. Carter? Yes. Do loud noises still startle you? Sometimes. Do you occasionally experience nightmares? Occasionally. So, you admit your combat experiences continue affecting your daily life? They affect my memories. Isn't that the same thing? No. He frowned. I continued. I remember my deployment. I remember losing friends. I remember being wounded. But I have never neglected my son. He changed directions. You still walk with a limp. Yes. Can you run? No. If Noah were in danger, my body would hurt afterward. I held his gaze. But I'd still get to him first. He didn't ask another question for nearly a minute. Outside the conference room, Linda smiled. You handled that beautifully. I've testified before military review boards. I could tell. Still, something about Daniel's behavior bothered me. He wasn't acting like a father desperate to reconnect with his son. He was acting like a businessman pursuing an investment. The answer came unexpectedly. One Saturday afternoon, Noah was at soccer practice when Michael stopped by with coffee. He looked unusually serious. I think I know what's going on. What? I ran into an old coworker. So? He works for Daniel's company. I waited. Apparently Daniel has been bragging. About what? That his son was accepted into the Carolina Junior Leadership Academy. I frowned. He never even congratulated Noah. Michael nodded. According to my friend, Daniel keeps telling people his kid is on track for military academy recommendations and scholarship opportunities. Everything suddenly clicked. The Leadership Academy, the scholarships, the prestige. Daniel didn't suddenly want to raise his son. He wanted to claim him, to show him off, to rewrite history. That realization hurt less than I expected. Mostly because it confirmed what I'd already known. He still hadn't changed. The trial began in early spring. The county courthouse felt strangely familiar. Military hearings had taught me to stay calm under pressure. Still, family court was different. This wasn't my career. This was my child. Daniel looked successful. Tailored navy suit, expensive watch, perfect haircut. His wife sat behind him wearing pearls. They looked like the picture of suburban success. I arrived carrying one worn leather folder. Inside were 9 years of truth. Judge Eleanor Watkins entered precisely at 9:00. She greeted both attorneys politely before reviewing the case file. Daniel's lawyer went first. For nearly an hour, he painted a heartbreaking picture. A wounded veteran, permanent physical limitations, emotional trauma, a child who supposedly needed greater stability. Several times he referred to me as disabled. Each time I quietly wrote notes. When it hit our turn, Linda didn't attack Daniel. Instead, she introduced evidence, employment records, medical evaluations, school reports, volunteer certificates. Every witness described the same woman: dependable, patient, disciplined, present. Then Daniel took the stand. He spoke confidently. I've always loved my son. Linda stood. When was the last birthday party you attended? Silence. When was the last parent-teacher conference? Silence. What is Noah's favorite subject? Daniel hesitated. A science. It is history. She continued. What size shoes does your son wear? No answer. What food is he allergic to? Daniel looked toward his attorney. I don't remember. Linda thanked him and returned to her seat. Judge Watkins remained expressionless. She reviewed the exhibits quietly before speaking. I noticed repeated references to Mrs. Carter's military service. She looked toward Daniel's attorney. Has the court received her complete military record? No, Your Honor. I'd like to see it. The courtroom suddenly became very quiet. The clerk disappeared through a side door. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a sealed military file. The courtroom became so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The clerk carefully placed the sealed military file in front of Judge Eleanor Watkins. She broke the seal without ceremony. No dramatic speech, no theatrical pause, just the quiet confidence of someone who understood that facts carried more weight than emotion. She turned the first few pages slowly: service history, promotions, performance evaluations, medical reports, awards. No one spoke. Daniel sat upright beside his attorney, looking almost relaxed again. I could tell he believed the military file would simply confirm what his lawyer had been arguing all morning, that I had been seriously injured and permanently limited. He had no idea what else was inside. Neither did his attorney. Judge Watkins continued reading. Occasionally, she underlined something with her finger before moving to the next page. Then she stopped. She didn't reach the end of the file. She stopped halfway through. Her eyes rested on one paragraph for several long seconds. She read it again. Then she looked toward me. Mrs. Carter? Yes, Your Honor. Was this portion ever classified? Yes, ma'am. And it has since been declassified? Yes. She nodded once. I see. Across the room, Daniel shifted in his chair. For the first time all morning, he looked uneasy. The judge adjusted her glasses. I'm going to read one sentence into the record. Every person in that courtroom seemed to lean forward at exactly the same moment. She read calmly. Despite sustaining multiple life-threatening injuries, Lieutenant Colonel Emma Carter repeatedly refused evacuation until every soldier and civilian under her protection had been safely evacuated. Military psychological evaluation conducted afterward unanimously concluded that her decision-making under extreme stress remained exemplary and that she demonstrated extraordinary judgment, emotional stability, and unwavering devotion to those in her care. Silence. Absolute silence. The sentence hung in the courtroom like a bell that had just been struck. I closed my eyes for a brief second. I hadn't heard those words spoken aloud in years. When I opened them again, Daniel had gone completely pale. His mouth opened slightly. No, he whispered. His eyes never left me. That's not possible. Judge Watkins looked directly at him. Mr. Carter, he didn't answer. I assume your attorney has reviewed this document. His lawyer looked genuinely confused. No, Your Honor. I was never provided the complete military record. The judge raised one eyebrow. Interesting. Daniel's attorney quickly flipped through the copy the clerk had handed him. His expression changed with every page. He stopped at the same paragraph. Then he turned 2 more pages, another, then another. Finally, he slowly closed the file. Not slammed, not dropped, simply closed it. He removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. That quiet gesture spoke louder than any objection could have. Linda leaned toward me and whispered, I think their case just collapsed. But the hearing wasn't over. Judge Watkins folded her hands. Mr. Carter, Daniel finally looked up. You have repeatedly argued that Mrs. Carter's military injuries rendered her incapable of making sound parental decisions. Yes, Your Honor. Yet the official evaluations performed by the United States Army conclude precisely the opposite. Daniel swallowed. I wasn't aware, the judge interrupted him. I believe that has become quite obvious. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Judge Watkins continued. This court also has before it 9 years of school records. She looked down again. Perfect attendance at parent conferences. She turned another page. Volunteer work. Another page. Medical appointments. Another. Teacher evaluations. Then she looked at Daniel. I have found no evidence that Mrs. Carter has ever failed to place her son's needs ahead of her own. She paused. I have, however, found substantial evidence that you voluntarily chose not to participate in your son's life for nearly 9 years. Daniel's attorney stood. Your Honor. She raised one hand. I'm not finished. He sat back down. The judge turned toward Noah. Our son had quietly remained beside the court-appointed child advocate throughout the hearing. He wasn't frightened, just confused. Judge Watkins smiled gently. Noah. Yes, ma'am. Do you love your mother? He looked surprised by the question. More than anybody. Does she take good care of you? Every day. What do you want this court to know? Noah hesitated. Then he answered with the simple honesty only a 10-year-old can. My mom never quit. The courtroom fell silent again. My leg got hurt playing baseball last year. He glanced toward me. Mom carried me into the emergency room even though her own leg was hurting. His voice cracked. She always says soldiers don't leave people behind. He smiled. And she never left me behind either. I felt tears rolling down my face. Not because I was embarrassed, because every difficult day, every painful therapy session, every lonely birthday, every sleepless night had somehow led to this moment. Judge Watkins quietly removed her glasses. Thank you, Noah. When she looked back at Daniel, her voice remained calm, but it carried unmistakable disappointment. Mr. Carter, there is a significant difference between becoming interested in a child. She paused. And becoming a parent. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time since I'd known him, he had absolutely nothing to say. Judge Watkins remained silent for several moments before delivering her decision. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the courtroom clock seemed louder than usual. Finally, she folded her hands and looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Carter, this court recognizes the importance of a child having both parents in his life. Daniel straightened slightly. For a brief second, hope returned to his face. Then the judge continued, but parenthood is measured by consistent love, sacrifice, responsibility, and presence, not biology alone. She looked toward me. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Mrs. Emma Carter has provided this child with a stable, loving, and secure home despite extraordinary physical challenges. She turned another page. Your military injuries have not diminished your ability to parent. Another pause. In fact, the evidence suggests they strengthened your commitment to your son. I lowered my eyes, fighting back tears. 9 years. 9 long years. Every doctor's appointment. Every late-night fever. Every school project. Every birthday. Every Christmas morning. Every difficult conversation. Someone had finally seen all of it. Judge Watkins looked back at Daniel. This court also finds that you voluntarily removed yourself from your son's daily life for nearly a decade. Her voice remained calm. You cannot disappear during the difficult years and return only when the rewards become attractive. The courtroom stayed perfectly still. Therefore, she closed the folder. The petition for sole custody is denied. Daniel slowly closed his eyes. The judge wasn't finished, however, she continued. I believe children benefit from healthy relationships whenever possible. She looked directly at Daniel. If you sincerely wish to become part of Noah's life, that opportunity still exists. His eyes lifted. But it will not begin with custody. It will begin with trust. She ordered a gradual visitation schedule supervised by a family counselor. No sudden changes, no disruption to Noah's life. Every step would depend on Noah's comfort and emotional well-being. The hearing was over. People quietly gathered their papers. Linda squeezed my shoulder. You earned this. I don't know if I did. She smiled. You've been earning it for 9 years. Outside the courthouse, Sildstang spring sunshine warmed the courthouse steps. Reporters weren't waiting. There were no television cameras. Just ordinary people walking to their cars after another ordinary day in court. Exactly the way I preferred it. Michael wrapped me in the biggest hug he'd given me since I came home from deployment. I told you. You did. No one was taking that boy away. Noah hugged both of us at once. For a few precious moments, everything felt wonderfully normal. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Daniel stood several feet away. He looked older. Not because of gray hair, because something inside him had changed. His wife remained near the courthouse entrance, but didn't come any closer. For the first time in years, Daniel looked directly into my eyes. I owe you an apology. I waited. I should have been there. Yes, I was selfish, yes. I convinced myself leaving was easier. I nodded. It was. He looked toward Noah. I kept telling myself I'd have time later. His voice cracked. 9 years disappeared. There wasn't much left to say. No speech could return Noah's first steps, his first baseball game, his first day of school, his nightmares, his birthdays. Those moments belonged to the past. I can't change what I did, Daniel said quietly. No, but I'd like the chance to become a better father. I looked toward Noah. This wasn't my decision anymore. He was old enough to have a voice. I knelt beside him. You heard everything. He nodded. What do you think? He thought longer than most adults would have. And finally, he looked at his father. You hurt my mom. Daniel closed his eyes. I know. You hurt me too. I know. Another long silence followed. Then Noah said something I'll never forget. I don't forgive people because they deserve it. He glanced at me. My mom taught me forgiveness is something you choose. Daniel began crying. Real tears, not courtroom tears. The kind that come when someone finally stops lying to themselves. I'd like to get to know you, Noah continued, but slowly. Daniel nodded immediately. As slowly as you need. That was the beginning, not of a perfect family. Those only exist in movies, but of an honest one. Over the next year, Daniel showed up. Not perfectly, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes uncertain, but consistently. Family counseling wasn't easy, neither was rebuilding trust. Trust grows much more slowly than it's broken. Yet little by little, father and son found common ground. Daniel even began volunteering with wounded veterans through a local nonprofit. One afternoon, he quietly admitted something to me. "When the judge read your military record, I looked at him. I realized I'd spent years telling myself you were broken." He smiled sadly. "The truth was I was the one who ran. I didn't answer, I didn't need to. Life had already answered for me. Today Noah is preparing for college. He still wants to serve others. Whether in uniform or another profession, that's his decision. I'm simply proud that he grew into a compassionate young man, not because his life was easy, but because hardship never hardened his heart. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have understood 9 years ago. The greatest victory wasn't winning in court. It wasn't proving Daniel wrong. It wasn't even hearing that sentence from my military record read aloud. The greatest victory was raising a son who learned that strength isn't measured by rank, medals, or revenge. It's measured by character. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll remember one thing. The people who stay through life's hardest battles often shape us far more than those who walk away. If you've ever witnessed that kind of quiet courage in yourself or someone you love, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, family, and second chances, I'd be honored if you shared this story or joined me again. The end.